I am so tired. I'm going to try to be as articulate as humanly possible. If I say or like more than often, please forgive me. It is a point of pride that I'm generally fairly articulate. But this is also day 15 and city 13. And so there's a lot of relief and fatigue and also just absolute joy. This is my first time ever doing an event in the Strand. This is such a beautiful, beautiful turnout. Thank you for coming and spending your evening with me.
I have to, yay.
Oh, thank you.
I also have to say that Victoria, at her not articulate, is more articulate than I will ever be. So I think we'll be okay. Okay, so, and also Victoria and I have been together now for 15 days straight on tour. So
we're bonded.
We're really bonded. We have this conversation down pat, but I think, well, first off, we're gonna try to keep this conversation spoiler free. So if you haven't read Vicious, don't worry, nothing's gonna come out.
No.
But why don't you start with why you decided to return to Merit after 5 years?
Yeah, so just a quick show of hands. This is a shame-free environment. Raise your hand if you have not read Vicious. Oh, wow. Okay. No, I'm impressed. That's a much lower number than usual. Well, welcome. Welcome to the Villainous Fold. I'm very excited to have you here. So for those who don't know, Vicious was my first adult novel. It was my fourth published novel. It was my first adult one. And as one of those intersections where business meets art, I needed to make sure that it could stand alone because I didn't know if it was going to sell well enough that they were going to let me write another one. That's just the nature of publishing. And so I wrote a book that I hoped would be able to stand alone as long as it needed to, potentially indefinitely. But I always hoped that I would get to write a series. I planted a few little nuanced threads. About half the people who finish reading Vicious believe it ends with a period, closed, and about half the people who finish reading Vicious believe it ends with a massive cliffhanger on the last page. Really kind of depends how you read that last page. And so I'd always wanted to come back to it. It's my strange child that I started working on when I was falling out of love with writing. I was in a really difficult spot of publishing. I was learning how to write in a glass box instead of in a very safe little nest, and I was really struggling with it. And so I started writing a book in secret that nobody else was ever going to see. And I wrote it just for me, and I asked myself, if there was no publishing, if there were no place on the shelf, if there was no genre, no books, no marketing, what would I write? What did I want to read? And Vicious was the result of that, a book about two pre-med students who discover the key to superpowers are near-death experiences and set out to manufacture their own supernatural abilities using death and resurrection. Just a little lighthearted romp. Into villainy. And anyway, and so I was told about 2 years after Vicious hit shelves by my publisher, Tor, all right, fine. You can do another book. Like, cause I was like, can I do another book? Can I do another book? And they were like, let's see how it sells. Let's see how it sells. And in YA and in middle grade, often you feel like very flash and pan, and you feel like you have a very limited amount of time to succeed. And Tor was like, take a breath. Take a breath. We're here for you. This is your career. Like, just take a breath. And so 2 years in, they said, okay, you can write another book in the Vicious series, and it'll come out after the Shades of Magic series finishes. And so by the time I started working on the book that would become Vengeful, A Conjuring of Light was just coming out. And what I didn't predict, I have so many things about my career I have not predicted. What I really didn't predict is that A Conjuring of Light would go on to be my best-selling and best-received book. And it was my 13th novel, right? And so all of a sudden, instead of writing this sequel that was going to be just as much of a retreat, just as much of a gift, just as much as a safe place creatively as Vicious was, I was writing a book that had to follow up Vicious, which had this weird little cult following that people were very passionate about, and a book that had to follow up A Conjuring of Light. And as a creator, my greatest fear is someone saying her last book was better. And so I ended up in this really creatively paralyzing space of how was I going to write a book that satisfied anybody? How was anyone going to think that this wasn't disappointing in some way? And I didn't predict how difficult that would be. And so I fell back on the things I knew that had made Vicious successful. I fell back on Victor Vale. I fell back on that structure. And in falling back, in trying to find a place that I knew I could succeed, I did the one thing I swore I would never, ever do. and that is write a simple, direct sequel. Write a book that is only strong in that it is a continuation of a story you already love. I have always set out for myself as a goal that every book had to be its own book. Every book had to have its own arc, its own challenges, its own goals. And I failed in writing the first version of Vengeful. And I turned that book in on December 29th, basically. And on January 2nd, my editor called me. And she said, "This is a really, really good book, Victoria." And I said, "Yay, great." And of course, like, the sentence didn't end there, right? She goes, "If you had turned this book in a couple years ago, if I had turned this book in before A Conjuring of Light," really is what she meant, "it probably would have gone to print without very many corrections." And she said, "The problem is you have grown more in the last few years than this book has. You are better than the book that you just turned in." And she said, "The good news is there is a story here that you are beginning to tell, a story inside the story, and that is an amazing story. The bad news is that is not the story you have chosen to tell here," right? And the hardest thing ever was that she gave me the choice. She said, "I cannot tell you to rewrite this book. I know how much you put into this book. I know what the pressure is." She said, "We will be here to support you. I will support you. The publisher will support you. And a lot of readers will probably be perfectly satisfied because it's more of Vicious." She said, "I don't think you will be satisfied. I don't think you will be satisfied in a year or 5 years or 10 years. And I don't think that book, the book that you have just turned into me, is going to outlast you in any measurable way." And so after a few days of crying, a lot of crying, I deleted my book. I deleted my book early this year. I want to just make sure everybody understands. I'm not talking about a couple years ago. I'm talking January 2018. I deleted my book. And my editor and I began to rewrite and restructure and dig out that story that was within the story. The book, she said, if you can find that one, then that's the story you should be telling, because that's the story that's going to last. And that's the book that you guys have tonight. So it's a bit of an ordeal, right?
Rewriting a whole book is not something you do lightly.
Rewriting a book is definitely not something you do lightly. Rewriting your 15th novel is not something you ever really think you're going to have to do. But I have really pushed myself my entire career to make sure that I never become comfortable in my work, that I never lean in too heavily to anything that I've already done.
Well, we talked about this a couple of days ago, but you used the phrase I burned the house down.
Yeah.
And the reason why you burned the house down was for Marcella, the lovely lady on the cover here.
Yeah.
And Marcella, if you guys haven't read Vengeful yet, Marcella is perhaps one of the most timely characters in the worst ways. Because she is all about the inner female rage.
She's an embodiment of female rage, in a lot of ways.
But you have three, if Vicious is a look at male power, and then Vengeful is a look at female power. So maybe talk about one, how awesome Marcella is.
I know, right?
And then what
cathartic character.
Yeah, what Sydney's been up to, and about June.
So what I will say, and I think this is probably the best way to sum it up, whether you have read it or haven't read it, Vicious is a book about control. Specifically, it's a book about male control. It's a book about toxic masculinity and male friendships and ego and a lot. But really at its core, it is a book about two men exerting control over themselves, their world, their environment. For Victor and Eli, those two men, Vengeful is a book about losing control. Vengeful is a book about what happens when you take characters that are so used to clinging to control, to dominating the world around them, and you begin to strip that control away. Eli is in prison. Victor's power is shattered and not working properly. These are characters who are losing control in a very slow freefall. Now, for the women in Vengeful is a book about taking back control when the world tries to take it away from you. So we have Serena Clarke, who we first meet in the pages of Vicious as a 13-year-old necromancer. She is now an 18-year-old necromancer, but unfortunately for Serena, she, as a weird side effect of how she almost died, she's not aging. And so you have an 18-year-old trapped in a 13-year-old body who is literally being infantilized by everyone around her, both by strangers and by those who love her and want to protect her. Someone who genuinely cannot control the limitations of her physical state. And then you have June, who has perhaps my favorite power in the entire villain series. June is essentially a walking, talking voodoo doll. Imagine if Mystique from X-Men had not only the ability to take on the appearance of somebody else, but if while she appeared as that other person, if somebody tried to hurt her, only the person she looked like got hurt. So she is, right? I felt very good. Thank you.
So many eyes.
I
just
know,
went,
right?
like, pop
I
below.
felt very clever that day. But what this means is essentially June has sacrificed her entire identity and her life and all of her attachments to guarantee that she's never hurt again. And that's a major sacrifice on her part. And then you have Marcella, the lady on the cover, the woman at the heart of this story in so many ways, who is an ex-mob wife turned murderess. And the reason I refer to her as an ex-mob wife is because in the opening pages of Vengeful, her husband tries to murder her and burn their house down with her inside of it. And after those events, as Marcella is forming her new life, she decides that she no longer feels particularly attached to the idea of being this man's wife anymore.
So weird.
So weird the way that happens, given those circumstances. And so she sets out to reclaim her own individuality, and she happens to have the ability to ruin anything she touches. And a woman who starts out as the idea of the embodiment of hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned, proves to be so much more than that. You learn that she is a woman who put herself at her husband's side, put herself in this sidekick role to an end when she was quite a bit younger, that she is ambitious, that she has her life really structured around her own ideals, and it's only this Phoenix-style rising that makes her realize maybe she doesn't need to be on anybody else's arm. Maybe she doesn't need to be anybody's sidekick. Maybe she should be the one running the show. And so Vengeful is set around Victor and Eli falling apart and around Marcella, Sydney, and June rising up.
If you are feeling angry lately, Marcella is a really good place to put some of that anger.
If you're feeling mad, this is a very cathartic book to read right now. It certainly was a cathartic book to rewrite in 2018. It's been really nice to see some of the quotes that have come out online. They're almost always attributed to Marcella. And I think it's really important to acknowledge, like, these are three women who in so many ways embody and react to so many of the microaggressions that we take on daily, so many of the ways in which we're abused, but also simply erased and walked over and looked over. And these are three characters who have the ability to be the avatar that I think a lot of us need right now to move within a space in a lot of the ways we feel like we necessarily can't. And yes, some of that is murder, and some of that is simply exerting and taking up space in a way that we are so often told not to.
Okay, we're going to get to the questions, but really quickly, do you want to tell everybody what else you've been up to? Because we have some show and tell here.
I was going to say, I have a show and tell. So, City of Ghosts came out a month ago. Thank you. Yes, thank you. It's been a very busy month. Vengeful obviously just hit shelves, and because apparently I don't like sitting still at all, and because publishing doesn't really work around your own timelines and things all of a sudden come out all together, even though you're like, we could have spaced that better. Steel Prince, my first ever comic book series, starts this Wednesday, right? For those who don't know, Steel Prince is set in the world of Shades of Magic. It is a prequel. It's not an adaptation. It's not just a repeat of content. It is brand new content set 30 years before A Darker Shade of Magic, when the king, Maxim, is Rise Age. I think I'm going to say not much more about that because I think it comes out on Wednesday. You can get it from Midtown Comics here. You can also get it from Comixology if you're a digital reader, or anywhere that you like on the internet. And if you are just like completely thrown by the world of comics and you're too shy to figure it out, though I hope you will try for my sake, in February, the paperback bind-up will be coming out of all 4 issues. So yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Go.
I'm very tired. I live on your applause. Right.
What places inspire you the most for writing?
What places inspire me the most for writing? This is really difficult. This goes a lot in questions with like, what do you need in order to write? Like, what is your ideal environment? I, of course, have ideal environments, but I travel so much of the time that ideal environments and circumstances become caveats and become contingencies and become excuses not to write. The more I say, oh, I only write in the morning, or I only write when I have this kind of light or this environment or this what have you, it's a really good excuse for me not to write given how much I'm on the road. So I try to limit as many of those necessities as possible. I tend to always have a cup of tea and some kind of ambient noise, whether that means a cup of tea in the corner of a coffee shop, whether that means a cup of tea at my kitchen table with some music playing that doesn't have lyrics. I try to make my life as simple as possible. But I will say, I recently moved to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and I have this kitchen. It's my heart place because I don't get to spend the whole year there. I only get to spend my little off seasons. By off seasons, I mean my on creative seasons, off promoting seasons. And I have a kitchen table, and the kitchen table sits before this window that has kind of rippling glass because it's very old. And through this rippling glass, you can see Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, which is like this beautiful volcanic rock formation. And it's also the only room in my entire apartment that doesn't get Wi-Fi. So it's my favorite place to write because there's simply no distraction. I know that if I sit down at that table, the only thing that I get to do is make something.
I want to go to there.
I know.
Your books are so vivid, filled with images and sounds I can instantly hear. How do you plan your scenes?
How do I plan my scenes? I'm going to say something that's very disruptive to a lot of creative people who are like, there's a way, right? I write out of order. And I think a lot of people think that means I write my chapters in my books out of order. That's not actually true. I mean that I write every sentence in every scene out of order. So what I mean by that is imagine that you have a puzzle, and the first thing you do when you get a puzzle is you like open the box, like slit open the bag and dump all the puzzle pieces out onto the table, and then you assemble the puzzle. That is what I do when I write a scene. I dump a lot of pieces, I like assemble pieces. So I collect them, I make them from scratch. So essentially, the one thing I do in order is I outline my book. I create very like 2 to 3 sentence little blocks of text of what needs to happen to get me through the book. And then I'll pick one and I'll be like, okay, here's 3 sentences of plot, just plot movement, and I'll drop it onto an empty page. And then I'll start unpacking it. And I'll say, okay, let's turn these 3 sentences into 10 sentences. And as I start to expand it, I start to make puzzle pieces. I start to think, oh, here's a really nice line of dialogue that could go somewhere in there. And here's a really nice line of description. And as I'm unpacking the scene, I'm creating more and more puzzle pieces that I then begin to say, as you would when you make a puzzle, oh, look, these 2 pieces go together. But it is the most nonsensical. I am screwed if I ever stop midway. Like if I stop midway in working on one of these scenes, I'll never be able to find my way back in. I get so disoriented and so lost. But yeah, I structure my scenes in this very, very idiosyncratic method that works for me, and that's all that matters. And the most important thing to remember, if any of you are writers, is 1, there is no right way to write. There's absolutely no right way to do it. You can pull 50 best-selling authors, and they would all tell you 50 different pieces of advice, and none of it should be prescriptive because there's truly no way. The only thing that works is what works for you. And that is the only thing that matters. And really the only thing that matters is that at some point, be it over the course of a month, a year, a decade, you hit the end. Because once you hit the end of a draft, you can make it better. You can't fix something if you don't have something to fix. So yeah, it's a very idiosyncratic method, but it works for me.
Wait, has that always been the way?
I used to fight it. I used to try and make myself write in order. I used to try and make myself outline. And then I realized that I could have both if I outlined in order. So I build myself a skeleton, and that skeleton is in order. And then I allow myself to create the actual scenes and the actual chapters out of order.
Why did you choose London as the setting for the Shades of Magic series?
Why did I choose London? There's 2 very specific reasons. One of them is a little cheeky and one of them is quite honest. The cheeky reason is that it's the most overused setting in fantasy, right? And I wanted to play with that though, right? Because it's the most overused setting in fantasy, but 3 of my 4 Londons bear no resemblance to the actual London. In fact, the only real London, you spend roughly 25 pages there. So like we depart from the idea of London that is used so often in fantasy very quickly, and I was trying to be cheeky. But the more genuine answer is that the worlds that I'm writing are designed on a geographic model. So the reason that I have 4 alternate versions of London is so that I can strip these alternate realities down to their geographic pieces and then build a new city on top. So the bones underneath the body are identical, right? And I needed to pick a city that I could do that with, that you would be able to reduce to a north bank, a south bank, and a river running through it. Something that most people in many places of the world would be able to visualize. And I found that London was one of the most archetypal cities in that way, that I could then, scrub the map clean of details, and you would still know what the map without the details vaguely looked like. And that's because, for those who don't know, the Shades of Magic series are designed so that each London has a different relationship. Sorry, it's a very 15th day. Each London has a different relationship with magic, and that's what forms the world. That's what forms the society. But I wanted one step in one place to be one step in one place to be one step in one place. And so I picked London because it was a very archetypal setting.
If you could give younger Victoria any advice, what would it be?
Oh, dear.
Baby Victoria.
Baby Victoria. I started quite young. And when I started, I was 19 when I wrote my first book. That book would never be published. But I was 21 when I wrote the book that would become The Near Witch, which was my very first book published. And I was so extraordinarily concerned with success. And I think it's impossible not to be, right? But because I was so concerned with success, for my first 3 novels, I was continually asking basically myself and my publisher, what should I be doing? What should I do? What will people read? What will make you happy? What will always? And all of those questions were directed outward to somebody else. I asked my publisher what they wanted to see. I asked my readers what they wanted to see. I asked everybody except myself what they wanted to see. And I worked, even though I was writing stories that I enjoyed, I wasn't writing purely for myself, because I was, in a weird way, being more selfish. All I wanted was success. I wanted to break in. I wanted to make a space for myself. And then everything in my career started to go wrong. Like, genuinely, I was 25 and things just went really quickly to shit because publishing is very hard. And the average lifespan in publishing is very short. There's a reason that there's this massive fall off between the number of debut authors and the number of sophomore authors and the number of junior authors. And we become very small very quickly. And I knew that I might not make it in publishing. And that's when I sat down to write Vicious, when everything externally was a complete mess. And I asked myself that question I mentioned earlier. I asked myself, if everything else went away, if this didn't get to be my job anymore, but I had to salvage my love of writing somehow. And it was the first time 4 books in that I started asking myself and genuinely holding myself accountable for the question, what do I want to write? And what do I want to read? And started putting that obligation and that responsibility inward, because you can do everything right and your book could still fail. You could do everything right and you might not make it in publishing. But the only way to guarantee that you don't feel miserable about that, the only way to guarantee that you don't feel like you just wasted time and energy and years, is to make sure that you are incredibly happy with what you are making, that you are your first reader and your first writer. And I don't think that young me would have listened to that, because it's something you have to move through. But if I could make a younger version of myself take any advice, it would be to make sure from day one that I wasn't focusing on success as much as about writing something that I would be proud of and that I wanted to read. Because here's a really funny thing that happened. When I started asking myself that question, what do I want to read? When I started becoming more specific in my audience instead of trying to write broadly, that's when my career started. I wrote thinking I'm going to have a narrower and a narrower audience, but it's okay, I'm going to be proud of myself. And instead, what happened is that my audience exploded. Because in writing authentically to myself, I discovered that there were a lot of people out there who were just as strange and weird and morbid as I was, But even if that hadn't been the case, I have had books which have performed better than other books since then. They're not all equal. It's not a clean upward tilt, but at least I have never had a book since that day that I have had any regrets about.
Do you listen to music when you write? And if so, what do you listen to?
Music is a hard thing for me. I love music. I tend to assign a character a song. And then that song becomes my really quick shortcut entryway to that character. But I then don't listen to those songs while I'm actually drafting, because most of the time they have lyrics. I come from a poetry background, and I have a very hard time writing and hearing my own cadence in my work, my own rhythm and flow, if I have lyrics coming into my head as well. So I tend to, for the actual writing process, I stick with scores, with things which are a lot of classical, but honestly, film scores are my favorite thing, because a film score has every beat that you want to hit. A good film score has action scenes and quiet moments and intense and romance. It has every single one. And so you can break down almost any film score and get everything that you creatively need out of it from a pace and from a mood perspective. So I rely much more heavily on film scores. Though I will say, like, there will be a song that I just, while I'm sitting there thinking of a scene, thinking of a character, I'll absolutely listen to lyric-based music, but when I actually sit down to craft and to draft, I can't do it.
So what was the film score for Vengeful?
It was John Wick 2. Okay, to be fair, I love both John Wick movies, and I watched them a lot while I was preparing to revise, because they have a very specific palette and style, and those are the kinds of things I try to write with in mind. I want you to be able to see, shockingly, the color palette that I'm writing in for those who, Shades of Magic. Every one of my books is in 4 colors now, just those 4 specific colors. But John Wick is one of those really great productions where it has amazing action sequences, but it also has really, really highly stylized color palettes. I love them, with a very important caveat for those who have not read Vicious. I have a dog in my book. The dog does die for like 30 seconds, all right? So the rule is, in all of my books, I'm gonna set this out there now. It could be the end of the world, and it's Raimaresh and a dog. Everyone else could be dead, but those two will be safe, right? Like, I will never kill the dog, and I will never kill Rai. I haven't finished writing Threads of Power, but I still know he'll be okay. I will say that dog dies again in Vengeful, and shocker, the dog comes straight back. Like, it's okay. I have a really, really hard time with animal murder. I won't write it, and I really don't enjoy reading it. And obviously the irony there is that John Wick is entirely predicated upon somebody murdering an assassin's puppy, right? I would say if you want to watch the John Wick movies, please start 10 minutes in. And the nice thing is they are on Netflix now. Nobody is paying me to say this, but I would take some free copies of John Wick from anybody. And you can fast forward the little scroll bar along the bottom from minute 3 to minute 13. And then they're amazing, amazing movies. But I do tend to watch something like that on repeat while I'm working. I'm so excited. Also, can we talk about how much I love tales of bands of mercenaries, and how excited I am for The Continental, which is the idea of the TV show based in that hotel, but also down to Deadpool and that bar. All I want to do is write about bands of mercenaries. It's going to happen at some point, maybe 5 years from now.
And all the puppies survive.
All the puppies survive. And the cats. I'm equal opportunity. I don't kill animals in my books.
Any advice for writers in the query pile?
Oh, querying. I think there's a really false idea that it's who you know, and it's not. The fact is, so here's an interesting thing. After I became a published author, out of sheer interest, I became a reader for a literary agency. I spent a summer reading query letters. I didn't need to write any more query letters, hopefully, in the near future, but I was intensely interested in the process, and I wanted a little bit of the behind the scenes. Shocker, being a Slytherin, I like to know how shit works. Mostly so I can game that system at some point later on. And I will tell you, though, that the query letter writing process, for those who don't know, you write a book. You make it the absolute best book you can make it yourself. It does not have to be publishable. It won't be publishable, let me put it that way. You make it the best it can be, and then you query an agent. And in querying an agent, you essentially write a letter that is jacket copy. You want to capture the agent's attention. You want to make them want to read the book. The agent will then usually request 50 pages of a manuscript, and if they like it, they'll request the entire manuscript. And if they like it, then they might offer to represent you. It is hard. It is meant to be hard. And the only thing I would say is I want everyone to remember, if you are a writer and you would like to be a published author at some point, that it is designed to be hard, not only to test your craft, but to test whether you emotionally, psychologically, mentally are ready to move forward. Rejection is designed to do that. Because here's the shocking thing. If you say you get an agent, and you're like, yay, that's all the rejection I'm ever going to experience, I have bad news. Like, your agent is then going to take your books out to publishers. And you will probably get rejected by a great many editors as well. Let's say you get accepted by an editor and you think, okay, great, now this is the last amount of rejection I'm ever going to get. Shocker. Your book is going to hit shelves, and then tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of people are suddenly going to have your book and review it. And some of them are going to hate it, right? And that's a form of rejection as well. And so what these thresholds are designed to do is, yes, absolutely, to test your craft, to test where you are, to test whether your idea is marketable, sellable, because this is a business, this is where we live, but also to test your reaction to these thresholds, to difficulty, to rejection. At some point, someone might ask you to revise and resubmit. They are also testing your ability to make something better and to not throw a fit and say, my books are written in blood and stone and you don't understand me. Like, that's what they're testing against. You would be very shocked how many people receive negative feedback to a query letter, and their response to the agency, aka to me, the reader, is, you're gonna regret this someday. Don't do that, guys. Like, don't do that. Don't corner people. Just use the channels. I was a cold query. I went through the process. I wrote a book. I wrote a query letter. I sent that query letter out. I was patient. I worked on my next thing, because you always need another book. Like, remember, the moment you start querying, don't just sit there and only refresh your inbox, which is a thing I have done on many occasions. If your book sells, you will need another book. If your book doesn't sell, you will, shocker, need another book. So, like, always be moving forward, always be working, but don't ever think that there's a shortcut here, that all you need to do is befriend the right people. It doesn't. 99.9% of the time, it's really not who you know. And even if you get a referral, that might crack open the door, but you're never going to get forward by anything except your merit in that respect.
Speaking of regret, is there anything you've written and regret writing?
Oh, man. I think I just said earlier that I regret nothing, and I'm probably going to take that back right now. No, so on the whole, I've written 15 novels. On the whole, I don't ever go back and look at my previous books and want to change anything. And that is not because they're perfect in any way, shape, or form. It's because they are the best that I could do at the time I was writing them. A book is a time capsule. A book becomes a static object, and an author continues to grow. And so you could drive yourself mad going back and looking at your previous work and trying to rewrite that with 2018 eyes. That's not the purpose for me. My purpose is to be getting better. My purpose is for each book to be speaking to the person I am when I'm writing that book. There is one exception, and it's not a whole book. Our Dark Duet. Our Dark Duet is the second half of the Monsters of Verity duology. There are 2 chapters. They got cut out because they happened in another location. And I resisted that edit, but in the end, I caved. And it's the only thing I think I wish I had stood firm on. I understood the editor's logic, the reasoning. It was very, very sound. This was a YA novel, and we wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting distracted, that I wasn't diluting this very intense pace and plot that we had on page. But one of the scenes in particular is set at the very, very end, and it's a character in another city finding out what's happened in Verity. And I regret that. And so actually, I thought about it really long and hard, and when the paperback of Our Dark Duet came out, we put the chapters back in at the end so that readers could see. I did not put them back into the place they would have been, because again, the book is the book is done. The book is not changeable in that way for me. But I still wanted readers to be able to see the only things that I thought became supplemental material, but that were very important to me still.
How do you stay organized when writing from alternating POVs and timelines, like for Shades or Vicious Vengeful?
So badly. I don't know if you can tell this, perhaps if you follow me online, a terribly disorganized person in almost every aspect of my life. I will say, though, that I use Scrivener. If you don't use Scrivener, I highly recommend it. If you're like me and you need a blank Word document for every single scene that you're writing, you will crash Word at about 47 documents. I know this, but I know it's bad. And then Word will erase things. Scrivener has a really amazing autosave. It basically works every 3 to 5 seconds. It creates a full duplicate. It's very hard to screw yourself over using Scrivener, and it also allows you to essentially make a table of contents down one side in which you are keeping all of those documents. So it's like a master file. And as someone who writes alinear stories or very strangely structured stories, I need to be able to move around the pieces. My pieces are usually point of view and timeline located, and I'll color code the little tabs, and I'll be able to drag, and my editor and I did this a lot. For Verity, we would drag one scene and be like, okay, is that chapter 1 of part 3, or is that chapter 3 of part 4? It depends on like the balance. And when you're working in a book like Vengeful, which has roughly 150 tabs, 150 pieces, 4 parts, a lot of moving pieces because there's essentially 6 main characters. It's very helpful. So I highly recommend it. I think Scrivener is like $40. It is one of the best investments I think you can make. It allows you to also like vision board. If you want to have a mood board, you can do those things. I'm really terrible about like supplementary features. I'm like, just put it in here and don't delete it. So like that's why I started using Scrivener, but it is really helpful. It'll keep track of your daily writing as we come up on NaNoWriMo. If any of you are doing that, highly encourage you to give Scrivener a try. Oh, it's a free download for Nano. Okay, great. So basically there are discounts and freebies abound with Nano coming up, so check out Scrivener. Again, they're not paying me for that, too. Maybe they'll make my next one free.
All the endorsements
all the endorsements. John Wick, Scrivener, but Scrivener has genuinely been a lifesaver because I have accidentally deleted massive chunks of book.
Okay, this is actually a question for me because it just popped in my brain. So I don't know, you guys, I'm sure most of you follow Victoria on social media, but there was a picture for when you and Miriam, your editor, were doing Vengeful, and you had laid out makeup bottles that you were using as characters because you were staging out a fight scene. So how often have you done that for every book where you have to physically kind of lay it out? I mean, Vengeful.
I use Funko Pops normally. We were. Okay, but here's the thing. So I'm a really cinematic writer, and what I mean by that is I have to be able to see visually every single scene as though it's a film, as though it's playing out. And then my job essentially becomes transcribing that into a written medium in the hopes that then you see it. It's very weird how books happen. Like you're looking at words on a page and then there's a movie in your mind, but some books more movie than others, right? So for me, a lot of my work is choreography. A lot of that little narrow band of blocking that I'm talking about when I'm breaking down a scene is the physical beats. When I'm expanding that scene, I'm wondering, okay, we have a fight scene. There are a lot of fight scenes in my books. Books are hard places to write fight scenes because it can get very confusing very quickly. Thank you, John Wick 2, for the abundance of fight scenes that you let me watch on repeat. And so I basically am working through where characters are moving. Now, the finale of Vengeful, this is not a spoiler, all the characters end up in one place. And it's a gala setting inside of a very large space. And I needed all of the characters to arrive and then move in relation to each other, but we're cutting points of view. So we're moving, so some character moves forward into the space, and then we cut across the space to the other character. Now, if I do this right, it should feel like when you're watching a movie and the screen cuts. And so that's the whole goal. But in order to achieve that, I have to be able to zoom out into a bird's eye look, especially because I'm dealing in multiple characters. And I often find that switching into a physical space like that, and Funkos are a perfect way to do it, really allows me. I use makeup bottles, and one of them was tipped over, and the whole internet was like, is the lipstick Eli? I don't know. And I was like, they were like, who's the lipstick? And I was like, guys, I'm not even sure I could tell you right now. A lot of characters are lying down at some point. But I find that these little things help. Like, I'm not like, you don't suddenly, like, that's not something you only do when you're starting out. I think so much of the reason I try to be transparent online, try to be honest online, is there's this idea that struggles are a thing that happen when you're starting out. That feeling like you suck might be a thing that happens when you're starting out and is a reflection of your ability as a writer, when the truth is that you feeling like you suck is pretty much like par for the course of every professional author's life most of the time. It's just we hit a point where it's intimated that we shouldn't let on, that we still feel like we suck. And so I try really hard to just be honest about that, because I think it's important to remember that writing is really solitary. Even when you're doing it in a community, your war is just between you and that blank page. And it can be really hard to not lose faith in yourself. And so I think it's really sometimes just helpful to know that, like, I'm working on book 16 right now. Guess what? I like kind of feel like I suck at this. And like, you're going to feel that way more often than not. It's just something that happens. In fact, I like that feeling a little bit because it shows that I'm pushing myself. It shows that I'm not getting comfortable. But yeah, I love stuff like that. I love the little like minutia.
I think you should always do one where there are like makeup bottles on the counter so people can try to figure
At some point, I'm just going to troll everyone and just like show all the Funko Pops are just lying down, and you're like, there's no survivors.
Except the dog.
Except the dog. There's just like one little dog standing up in the center of it, and Rye.
Okay, so we have time for just a couple more questions.
Okay.
So will there be any media adaptations, TV movie in the future for any of your books?
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to give you guys a lecture because I get this question a lot online, and then your job is to go forth to the internet. And I want you to now be my prophets to speak to everyone else on the internet. So congratulations, you have a new job. There's this weird, murky language that happens when a film, like a book, gets optioned for film or television. You'll notice authors will say, my book's going to become a movie, or my book's going to become a TV show. And that excitement is totally justified. However, it's factually incorrect. When a book gets optioned, which is something that you might notice happens quite often, a studio is essentially paying an amount of money to hold that project and keep it away from everybody else for a period of 1 to 2 years. And they're not guaranteeing they're going to make that movie. They're saying, we're going to pay money so that for right now, for the next year to 2 years, we own the option to make that movie. And then you have, like, just as with publishing, you have many doors you have to go through. With film and with television, first you get producers, and then you get a studio, and that's generally where the option happens. And they're like, have some money, nobody else can touch this. And sometimes studios do it for the wrong reason, and they're like, this book might become big. We don't actually think it will. We don't actually think that we're going to make a movie, but we want to stop everyone else from being able to make a movie, right? And then sometimes you'll get a screenwriter attached, and you're like, yay, still not going to be a movie, guys. Like, and then the screenwriter will go and they'll write a script. And then hopefully you'll get a director. And then hopefully you'll start casting. Now, when you start casting, that's when we should be allowed to be excited, right? Because that's usually still doesn't guarantee a movie, but it's starting to guarantee that there's movement happening. So I have most of my projects at this point, some public and some not yet announced, are in some form of development for either film or TV. And I've become a little skittish about announcing it because, as excited as I am, as much as I want to cheer with everyone, there is nothing more exhausting than having to tell people repeatedly that there's a 99% chance I will disappoint you in this way, right? So I live in what I call popcorn optimism, right? My popcorn optimism says that the day you can buy a bucket of popcorn, either in your home or at a movie theater, and watch something that I've made, will be the day we can celebrate it becoming a movie or a TV show. But I've had too many things get optioned and be in those stages of development. I've had scripts written, I've had people sign on and them not become a thing, that now I'm a little more guarded about it. So yes, right now there's a film in the works for Shades of Magic. The script is in its second revision. I don't know if it's going to become a movie. Maybe it will. Maybe the options will revert to me and they'll be sold to somebody else and that person will try again. I was just at the Good Omens panel for New York Comic Con. Amazing, right? Thank you. One of the things, not my project, but thank you. It's very exciting to be excited about it. What I will say, though, is I remember Neil was on stage talking to, like, David Tennant, and I was just like, hello. Hello, John Hamm. Anyway, and he said that they'd been trying to make this project for 35 years. So I want you to keep that in mind. All right, I'm not telling you to wait 30. Oh God, I hope I don't have to wait 35 years for something to happen. But they spent 30 of those 35 years with different production companies and different studios failing to make a movie of it. Now, I'm so glad, I don't know about you guys, that it's coming to TV because it looks really awesome. But that's all to say, sometimes waiting is better because really most of the time we only get to do this once, right?
So you're saying it's very easy.
I'm saying it's very likely that you'll get to watch a movie, but probably not of my books anytime soon. Like,
Right, we're hoping for less than 35 years.
less than 35 years would be ideal for me.
Okay, last question. What are you working on next?
Oh my God, you guys. Okay,
As your editor stares at you.
I have a pretty chill 2019. I don't know about you guys. My 2019 is fairly relaxed. I have a lot of comics coming out all year. All 2019. I can't talk about most of them. Can I talk about one of them? I think I can talk about one. Okay, so Steel Prince, which comes out, this week. Please go buy it. Originally sold as a single arc. But if you've read Conjuring of Light, you know that there are 3 main feats which form the Steel Prince's legacy. There's the Steel Prince and the Pirate Queen, which is the arc that starts on Wednesday, and the Pirate Queen looks amazing. Please go buy it. And then there's the Knight of Knives and the Rebel Army, and Titan has just picked up those as well. And so there will be 3 full arcs of comics. Yeah, like 12 comics coming out that will form the Steel Prince legacy, which I'm really, really excited about. And then I have my second middle grade, the sequel to City of Ghosts. Yeah, thank you. Which is coming out next summer and set in Paris, and really, really excited about that. Shocker, it gets darker, as with all of my projects. And then something that I am extraordinarily excited about, my next adult book, tiny little deviation for you before we dive into Threads of Power, is called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Oh, thank you. For those who don't know, Addie LaRue is essentially about a French girl and her relationship with the devil over 300 years, and that same girl and her relationship with a young man in New York City over 1 year. It's about a girl who sells her soul to the devil to live forever, or at least offers her soul to the devil to live forever. The problem is the devil says no, because he only gets her soul when the deal is done. If she lives forever, he never gets her soul. So kind of a bad deal for him. So he says no. And in a moment of sheer recklessness and desperation, Addie says that he can have her soul when she doesn't want it anymore. And so the devil says yes. And he gives her the ability to live forever. And in return, he curses her to be forgotten by everyone she meets. And it fast forwards through 300 years until she meets a young man in New York City who remembers her name. And it's about what happened and why these 2 and why these 3 really is the closest thing I will ever write to a love story, which should concern you all so much, because I don't think I have ever written anything that has a happily ever after exactly, but I'm really, truly excited. This is a book that I have been working on for 8 years. I wanted to bring it up also as an example that sometimes you wait. I waited to write this book. I had the idea for it 7.5, 8 years ago, and I didn't start writing it because I wasn't a good enough writer. My craft wasn't there, and I knew it. I knew I only got 1 shot at this particular book. It's a standalone. It's a little beast of a book, and I wanted to do it right. And then I spent another 5 years waiting for the right ending, because I write my endings first. And it wasn't until about a year ago that the ending slotted into place for me, and that I finally felt like my craft was in the right place. And so, yeah, I'm actively drafting that book right now. Right now.
Every time you talk about that book, I get a chill.
My editor is sitting on the floor staring at me. I'm like, yes, right now I'm writing it.
It's happening.
Right here.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. So a big hand. What?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm being told. Also, sorry. My editor is like, special editions. If you picked up A Darker Shade of Magic at any point, you might know that it has a very beautiful collector's edition, which is very pretty. There are 2 editions of it. That's one of them, right? Yes. Yeah. It's this beautiful black-wrapped special edition. There's also a silver one, right? Barnes & Noble special edition, thank you. And the rest of the series will be getting collector's editions. Each one will have bonus stories, so I'm writing another 7 short stories, quite a bit longer too, that'll all be in the back of the new collector's editions. The first one comes out in March of next year, and the second one comes out in November.
Yay.
Thank you, guys.